The headquarters of Helix Dynamics, a gleaming glass tower in the heart of the city, blazed like a lost star in the night. For 3 consecutive days, cold white LED lights had shone relentlessly, reflecting off the polished steel walls and the frigid marble floors. It was well past midnight, yet the air in the main operations room was heavy, like a storm about to break. The massive screen mounted on the wall glowed red with jagged graphs, signaling the failure of the $100 million medical AI project, the company's biggest bet to lead the tech industry. Damian Cole, 35, sat alone at the conference table, his deep blue eyes fixed on the screen. His face was sharp, without a single unnecessary crease, as if carved from stone. His black suit clung perfectly to his frame, but the loosened tie revealed the wrinkled collar of his white shirt, a rare sign of exhaustion. 3 sleepless nights had pushed his team of engineers to the brink, but the algorithm error remained stubborn, like an invisible monster gnawing at every effort. "Failure is not an option," he muttered, his voice low and cold. Though a flicker of unease glimmered in his gaze, something he always hid beneath the icy shell of a CEO. Out in the hallway leading to the server room, Callie Rivera, 33, pushed a cleaning cart, the wheels squeaking against the marble. The baggy gray-blue uniform did little to hide her slender figure, and a few loose strands slipped from her tied-up brown hair. She stopped in front of the server room door and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Through the thick glass, she could see the engineering team had stepped away for a short break, leaving the main screen blazing bright, displaying code and error charts. She meant to turn away and continue her invisible work, but a line of code on the screen made her freeze. Non-linear data, as clear as daylight, yet the training model was applying a linear method. "That's wrong," she whispered almost unconsciously. Her heart started pounding, not from fear of being caught, but because the spark of passion for technology, something she thought had long died, flared to life in her chest. Callie looked around the empty hallway, the only sounds the server fans roaring and the LED lights flickering. "I shouldn't," she told herself, gripping the broom handle tighter. But her eyes wouldn't leave the screen, where the red numbers seemed to be crying out for help. 6 years ago, she had been a brilliant machine learning engineer, dreaming of algorithms that could change the world, before Ethan betrayed the company and took his own life. Now she was just a shadow in this tower, but in that moment, a part of her woke up. She set down the broom and stepped into the operations room, her heart thundering against her ribs. The air still held the heat of tense debates. Callie sat down at the computer, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. She typed quickly, adjusting the training model, adding a data transformation to handle the nonlinearity. Each line of code was like a blade cutting into old wounds, but she didn't stop. The screen flickered, the angry red graphs slowly shifting to green. Callie bit her lip, sweat sliding down her temple. She didn't hear the heavy footsteps in the hall. "Callie Rivera?" Damian's cold voice sliced through the air, making Callie jump. She turned around to face his gaze like two blades of ice, equal parts furious and suspicious. Damian stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, his posture rigid yet radiating overwhelming authority. The LED light cast harsh shadows over his chiseled features and narrowed eyes, as if he were trying to peel away every secret she carried. "Why are you here? And what exactly are you doing to my system?" Callie shot up from her seat, the chair creaking behind her. She stammered. He knew who she was, his eyes made that clear. Panic surged up her throat, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I saw an error in the model," she said, her voice small but steady. "Nonlinear data can't be processed with a linear method. I just fixed it." Damian stepped closer, slowly like a predator closing in. He looked at the screen, where the graphs were now stabilizing, then back at Callie. "You fixed it?" His voice was low, laced with anger and reluctant curiosity. "Ethan Rivera's wife, working as a janitor in my company, dares to touch a multi-million-dollar system?" His words were like a blade, making her heart clench. She swallowed hard, her gaze resolute even though her hands still shook. "I used to be a machine learning engineer," she replied, her voice quivering slightly. "I know what I'm doing. I only wanted to help. That's all." Those words were a challenge, not only to Damian, but to her own past. Damian fell silent, His eyes locked onto hers as though trying to decipher every secret she hadn't yet revealed. He stepped to the keyboard and reran the simulation. The numbers updated. The error rate dropped by 40% in minutes. The air in the room felt frozen solid. Damien turned back to her, his gaze no longer only angry, now tinged with astonishment and a grudging respect. "Why are you here, Callie Rivera?" he asked again, his voice lower now, as if digging into old memories. "After everything Ethan did, why are you still in this company?" Callie looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "Because I have to provide for my son," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She said nothing more, but the letter in her pocket felt heavier, a reminder of secrets she couldn't yet reveal. Damien nodded slowly, as if committing every detail to memory. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., main conference room," he ordered, his tone no longer cold but carrying something more complex. "You will explain everything to the engineering team. Don't disappoint me." Callie opened her mouth to refuse, but the look in Damien's eyes stopped her. He turned and walked out, leaving her standing there amid the white LED lights and the roar of the servers. She touched the letter in her pocket, feeling as if Ethan were watching her from somewhere, proud and also regretful. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "There's no going back," she whispered. But in her heart she knew. She had just crossed a line, and Damien Cole, with all his resentment and suspicion, would never let her remain just a shadow. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. The morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass panels of Helix Dynamics headquarters, but couldn't dispel the suffocating tension in the main conference room. Glossy black leather chairs encircled the walnut table, where the company's top engineering team sat, their gazes wavering between curiosity and contempt. Callie stood in the corner of the room, her wrinkled gray-blue janitor's uniform clinging to her slight frame, hands clutching the hem of her shirt as if trying to hold on to a shred of courage. Last night, when Damien Cole spoke her name, Callie Rivera, with that cold, cutting stare, she knew her secret had been exposed. There was no way to hide anymore. Damien stood at the head of the table, his black suit hugging his body, his deep blue eyes sweeping across the room like a general preparing for battle. He didn't look directly at Callie, but every movement, from the way he tapped his finger on the table to the way he tilted his head while listening to reports, radiated overwhelming authority. "Ms. Rivera," he spoke at last, his voice low and sharp as a blade slicing through the air. "Last night, you altered the training model for the medical AI project. Explain yourself. Convince me and this entire team that you weren't simply interfering." Callie felt her heart tighten. More than a dozen engineers stared at her, their eyes like needles pricking her skin. Ethan's suicide note, still in her pocket, weighed on her chest like a stone. She took a deep breath, thinking of Nico, her 8-year-old son waiting at home, and found a small well of strength. "The project data is nonlinear," she began, her voice small but clear, though her hands trembled. "The team was using a linear method, so the model couldn't process it. I added a data transformation and adjusted the training process to make it compatible." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Marcus, the lead engineer, his face flushed with anger behind steel-rimmed glasses, shot to his feet. "What is she talking about?" he shouted, pointing a rigid finger at Callie. "Damien, she's Ethan Rivera's wife, the man who betrayed this company. She has no right to touch our system." Marcus's words exploded like a bomb. The engineers turned to each other, whispering in disbelief, their eyes shifting from suspicion to disdain. Heat rose in Callie's cheeks, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She wanted to explain, to say she wasn't Ethan, that she only wanted to help, but her throat closed tight. In her mind, Nico's smiling face appeared, steadying her legs. She lowered her gaze to the floor, refusing to run, though she couldn't meet their eyes. Damien raised his hand, signaling silence. His gaze shifted to Marcus, cold as ice. "Run the simulation," he ordered, his voice flat. A young engineer, pale and anxious, hurried to the terminal and typed in the commands to verify Callie's edits. The massive screen flickered as the charts, read for 3 days straight, slowly turned green. The number appeared. Error rate down 60%. The room went still, save for the clicking of the mouse and Callie's ragged breathing. Marcus sank into his chair, mouth agape. Other engineers exchanged bewildered looks, some mumbling in disbelief. How did she even? Someone whispered. Finally, Damien looked straight at Callie. His expression complicated a reluctant respect mingled with old resentment. You said you used to be a machine learning engineer, he said, his voice low, as if weighing every word. And you've just proven it. But don't expect anything to be easy from here. Callie swallowed, her gaze steady, though her hands still clung to her shirt. I expect nothing, she replied, her voice quiet but firm. I just want to do what's right. Those words were not only a statement to Damien, but to herself. She had stated Helix Dynamics, even as a janitor, to remain close to the dream of technology Ethan once shared, even if each workday was another confrontation with pain. Damien was silent, his eyes locked on hers. You'll work with the engineering team, he said, not a question, but a command. We need your talent, no matter what your past is. Before Callie could object, he turned to Marcus. Anyone with an issue about this can see me after the meeting. No one spoke, but their stares remained full of judgment. Callie nearly fled the room, her heart heavy. She pushed her cart down the hallway, feeling like she'd just stepped into a battle she hadn't asked for. Every step reminded her she was no longer invisible. Callie's small apartment sat on the city's edge, cramped but warm, smelling faintly of old cookies from the oven and covered in Nico's watercolor paintings taped to the walls. The yellow glow of an old desk lamp fell across Callie's face, now free of her uniform cap, her brown hair a tousled mess. She sat on the sofa, hands covering her face, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She had tried to live quietly, atoning for Ethan by staying at Helix Dynamics, even as a shadow no one saw. But that morning, standing before the engineering team, she'd felt stripped bare in front of the entire world. I'm not strong enough, she whispered, her voice breaking. She was afraid Damien's resentful eyes and Marcus's contemptuous words would drag her back to the darkest days when Ethan left her and Nico behind with a remorseful suicide note. Ethan Rivera, her husband, once a co-founder of Helix Dynamics, was also the man who left a wound that never healed in her heart and the company's. Soft footsteps approached. Nico, in robot-printed pajamas, emerged from his bedroom, his big round eyes filled with worry. Mom, why are you crying? He asked, his little voice full of concern. He climbed onto the sofa and wrapped his small arms around her. Are you sad about work? Callie gave a faint smile and wiped her tears with her sleeve. She pulled Nico close, breathing in the warmth of his little body. I'm not sad, she said, though her voice still trembled. I'm just afraid I'm not strong enough to do some things. Nico looked up, his eyes shining like stars. You're my superhero, he said firmly. Superheroes never get scared. His innocent words were a balm to her battered heart. She hugged him tighter, inhaling the sweet scent of his hair. Thank you, my little superhero, she whispered. Now go back to bed. He padded back to his room. But in her heart, she knew this journey was only beginning. Damien, with his complicated gaze and memories of Ethan, wouldn't let her remain a shadow forever. And Ethan's letter, full of remorse, waited to be opened, ready to change everything. She looked out the window where the city lights flickered in the distance. I have to keep going, she whispered, her voice carrying a fragile hope. Callie's hands trembled as she clutched Ethan's suicide note, a crumpled scrap of paper, its edges yellowed after 6 years hidden away. She unfolded it, her eyes skimming over her husband's shaky handwriting, but her heart clenched too tightly to let her finish reading. Memories flooded back sharp and painful as an open wound. She remembered that night 6 years ago when Ethan came home, reeking of alcohol, his eyes bloodshot. He had screamed in the living room, his voice breaking apart. Damien stole everything from me? Helix was my dream, Callie, and he took it all. She had held him, trying to calm his rage, but Ethan only shook his head, his gaze hollow like a man who had lost himself. The next day, she found him cold and lifeless in his study, next to the letter of apology. I was wrong, Callie, he wrote. I'm sorry to you, sorry to Damien, sorry to everyone. Those words were a blade carving a scar into her soul that would never heal. Callie gripped the letter tighter, her shaking fingers brushing its edge as if she might tear it to shreds and erase the past. But she stopped, her eyes blurring with tears. "I can't keep running," she whispered, her voice choked. This letter was the last proof of Ethan not only as a betrayer, but as a man destroyed by jealousy and pressure. She tucked it back into her pocket and drew a deep breath. Tomorrow morning, she would walk into that conference room, not to hide, but to face every condemning stare. The next morning, Helix Dynamics headquarters gleamed in the sunlight, but the main conference room was still cold, with steel walls and white LED lights. Callie stood in front of the mirror in the employee break room, taking a long breath before removing her janitor's uniform. Today she had a meeting with the board of directors, per Damien's orders. She put on an old white shirt, wrinkled but clean, the one Ethan had given her for their anniversary. Her brown hair was tied back neatly, though a few strands fell over her forehead. She looked at herself in the mirror, not an invisible shadow, but a woman ready to stand upright in the storm. The conference room doors opened. Callie stepped inside, feeling the board members' eyes on her like sharp blades. Men and women in expensive suits sat around the walnut table, their gazes flickering between curiosity and contempt. Damien Cole stood at the head of the table, his black suit perfectly fitted, his deep blue eyes sweeping the room. He nodded slightly, gesturing for Callie to stand beside him, then spoke in a voice low but resonant. "This is Callie Rivera, the person who saved our medical AI project. She revised the training model, reducing errors by 60% in a single night." The air seemed to freeze. A middle-aged man, silver-haired and cold-voiced, whispered just loudly enough for Callie to hear. "The wife of a traitor sits here?" The murmurs spread like fire through dry grass. "Ethan Rivera betrayed this company," another woman mumbled. "Why is she even here?" Callie felt her chest tighten as if the air itself had been sucked away. She stood tall, but her eyes wavered, caught between resolve and the pain those whispers caused. She wanted to turn and leave, to flee that room, but Nico's bright, smiling face rose in her mind, anchoring her in place. Damien spoke, his voice slicing through the murmurs like a blade. "Ms. Rivera," he said, his eyes locked onto hers, not only filled with resentment, but carrying a glint of something steadier. "Tell them why you were able to do what the entire engineering team could not." His words were not a question, but an opportunity for Callie to prove her worth. She drew a long breath. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke. "I was once a machine learning engineer," she began, her gaze sweeping across the judging faces. "I understand nonlinear data, and I know how to adapt a model to make it work. I'm not here to justify anyone's actions. I'm here because I believe in this project." Her words were a declaration not only to the board, but to herself, a confirmation that she was not merely Ethan's shadow. A heavy silence settled over the room. Some board members shook their heads, but no one spoke in direct objection. Marcus, the lead engineer, sat in the corner, his eyes still full of suspicion, but he remained quiet. Damien nodded, his gaze fixed on Callie as if weighing something deeper. "Ms. Rivera will lead the engineering team in the next phase," he announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We cannot let this project fail, and she has proven she is the most qualified." More murmuring erupted, but Callie no longer heard it. She turned, meaning to leave the conference room, unwilling to endure the scrutiny any longer. But a hand gently touched her shoulder, stopping her. She turned, startled to find Damien standing there. His eyes were no longer glacial, but held the faintest warmth, if only for a moment. "I won't leave you alone," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Not this time." His words swept away a little of the loneliness inside her. She nodded, her eyes shimmering with a fragile hope. Back in Callie's small apartment, the darkness was broken only by the yellow glow of the old desk lamp. Today, standing before the board, she had felt the weight of her past, but she had also glimpsed a sliver of light. Damien's words, brief as they were, gave her hope that she wasn't entirely alone. She thought of Nico, asleep in his room, and managed a faint smile. "For you," she whispered, "I have to be strong." She looked out the window where the city lights twinkled in the distance. But this time, Callie felt more ready to face whatever came next. Helix Dynamics Engineering Conference Room blazed under the cold white LED lights, but the air inside was as hot as a steel forge. The engineers, with laptops and cold coffee cups in front of them, sat around the walnut table, their eyes darting between suspicion and tension. Callie Rivera stood before the large screen. Damian Cole sat at the head of the table, his black suit perfectly fitted, his deep blue eyes studying Callie's every move. After yesterday's board meeting, he had ordered her to present the details of her revisions to the engineering team, not to test her, but to affirm she deserved her place. Still, the engineer's stares, especially Marcus's, were sharp as blades, as though waiting for her to fail. Callie took a deep breath, her fingers gliding lightly across the keyboard as she brought up the code she had altered. The screen flickered, displaying neat lines of commands. I added normalization to the script, she began, her voice small but steady, avoiding the convoluted jargon engineers often used. Our data is like a child learning to walk. It needs support, not pressure to move too fast. I also added checks for nonlinear modeling to ensure the parameters wouldn't skew. A heavy silence settled over the room. Marcus, his steel-rimmed glasses perched on his flushed face, shook his head but said nothing. A young engineer with messy hair whispered to his colleague, "Normalization? Does she think we don't know how to do our jobs?" But Callie didn't flinch. She enlarged the graph on the screen, pointing at the smooth green curve. The result was a 60% error reduction, she said, her gaze sweeping the room. We can improve further, but this is the first step. Damian watched silently, for the first time hearing technology explained in such a gentle voice. It wasn't the sterile language of technical reports, but something sincere, as if Callie were telling a story about life and hope. He leaned forward, his eyes no longer purely cold, but tinged with curiosity and perhaps a trace of admiration. Go on, he said, his voice low but carrying a hint of encouragement. Callie nodded, continuing to explain how she adjusted parameters and cross-checked data. She didn't look at Marcus or any of the doubting eyes. Instead, she focused on the screen, as if the lines of code were the place she felt safest. When she finished, a young engineer raised a tentative hand. But how did you know it was nonlinear data from the start? Callie gave a small smile the first of the meeting. Because I've lived with these numbers, she answered. They're not just data, they're dreams. Her words drew a hush over the room. Even Marcus didn't speak, though his eyes still brimmed with skepticism. Damian nodded, his gaze locked on Callie, as if seeing an entirely different person, not just the wife of a traitor, but a woman with an unquenchable fire inside. When the meeting ended, Callie stepped into the hallway, feeling as if she'd just weathered a storm. Damian's footsteps echoed behind her, and she stopped. She turned to see him standing there, hands in his pockets, his expression more complicated than ever. Ms. Rivera, he said, his voice low, no longer as cold as before. Why are you still working here? I don't believe it's only because you have to support your son. You have talent, you could find opportunities anywhere. Callie looked him straight in the eyes for the first time, not backing down. The hallway light fell across her face, highlighting features that were weary but resolute. I stay because Ethan's dream still lives in this code, she replied, her voice small but firm. He was wrong, I know that, but Helix was his dream and mine. I can't walk away. Her words were like a blade prying open old memories in Damian's mind. He remembered the early days of Helix Dynamics, when Ethan had sat beside him in their cramped office, his eyes shining as he talked about how AI could save lives from diagnosing disease to giving hope to those who had none left. Ethan had been the one who taught him that technology wasn't just lines of code, it was the heart of change. But jealousy and pressure had twisted Ethan into someone unrecognizable. Damian stayed silent, his gaze flickering between Callie and the space beyond her. Ethan once told me AI could save people, he finally said, his voice low, carrying something like old pain. I believed him, and then he betrayed all of us. He paused, looking Callie in the eyes. You remind me of him, the best part of him. Callie felt her heart tighten. She only nodded, her eyes glistening with an emotion she couldn't name. I'm not here to atone for Ethan, she said, her voice trembling, but I want to prove that our dream was still worth something. Damian didn't reply, but his gaze softened as if the wall between them had cracked just enough to let something through. He nodded once, then turned and walked away, leaving Callie standing in the hallway. For the first time, She felt a spark of connection, not to the past, but to a future she had never dared to hope for. The cold white LED lights of Helix Dynamics headquarters spilled across the long hallway where Callie Rivera stood, her hands trembling as they clutched Ethan's suicide note inside the pocket of her blouse. After this morning's engineering meeting where she'd presented her code revisions with a voice as gentle as telling a bedtime story, she had felt a small shift in Damian Cole's gaze. No longer only anger, but a flicker of curiosity, even admiration. But this letter, the crumpled scrap she'd kept for 6 years, still weighed on her heart like a stone, pressing her to act. She couldn't keep hiding. She needed to face Damian. She stood before his office door, her heart pounding so hard it felt as if it would break through her ribs. Through the frosted glass, she could see him sitting behind his desk, eyes focused on his laptop screen, brow furrowed. She knocked, her voice small but steady. "Mr. Cole, I need to speak with you." Damian looked up, his deep blue eyes scanning her, then nodded slightly, gesturing for her to enter. The office was large, its steel walls and windows overlooking the city cold, as the man himself once seemed. Callie stepped inside, stopping a few steps from the desk, her hands still gripping the letter in her pocket. "I have something," she said, her voice trembling. She pulled the worn, yellow-edged paper from her pocket and placed it on the desk in front of Damian. He was sorry. "I kept this because I didn't have the courage to give it to you." Damian looked at the letter, his gaze shifting, as if he had brushed against a wound that had never healed. Slowly he unfolded the paper, Ethan's shaky handwriting appearing under the light. Callie stood still, feeling the air between them grow heavy, almost suspended. Ethan had written, "Damian, I was wrong. Jealousy and greed blinded me. I never wanted to destroy Helix, but I did. I regret everything. I was too much of a coward to face you. Take care of Callie and Nico, if you still have any faith left in me." Damian's hand shook, his fingers gripping the paper as if it might dissolve. His eyes blurred, and in that moment he was no longer the cold CEO of Helix Dynamics, but a man confronting an old wound. "Ethan," he murmured, his voice low, carrying a surge of emotion. He looked up at Callie, his gaze pained and searching. "Why are you giving this to me now?" Callie drew a deep breath, her eyes steady even as her heart fluttered. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," she said, her voice small but firm. "I just want you to understand that Ethan was never all bad. He was wrong, but he loved Helix. He loved the dream the two of you built." She paused, then went on. "I kept this letter because I was afraid to face it, afraid to face you, but I can't keep running." Damian was silent, his eyes locked on her, as if searching her face for answers. He slipped the letter into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, the motion slow, as though he was storing away a piece of the past. "I never thought you were Ethan," he said finally, his voice low, carrying a note of gentleness. "But you remind me of him, the best part of him, the part I tried to forget." Callie felt her chest tighten, but it wasn't pain this time. It was a fragile hope. The letter had opened a door, however small, between her and Damian, a door that led to understanding, even if shadows still lingered beyond it. She nodded, saying nothing, her eyes glistening with an emotion she couldn't name. Damian stood, stepping out from behind the desk, his gaze never leaving hers. As he passed her, he stopped, his voice low but steady. "Tomorrow you'll attend the management meeting, not as an engineer, but as the lead on the medical AI project." His words cut through the wall between them, opening a new path, one that would be difficult, but real. Callie stood stunned, her mouth parting to protest, but the look in Damian's eyes silenced her. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the cold room. But for the first time, she no longer felt alone. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Night enveloped Helix Dynamics headquarters, the cold white LED lights flickering across steel walls. Yet Damian Cole's office held a rare touch of warmth from the golden glow of his desk lamp. Callie stood before his desk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her chest, her eyes wavering between determination and fear. But tonight, she hadn't expected Damian would push her into the light, both literally and figuratively. Damian sat behind the desk, his black suit no longer as rigid as before, His tie loosened. He looked at Callie, his deep blue eyes no longer cold, but filled with a quiet resolve. "Ms. Rivera," he began, his voice low but clear, "the Global Technology Conference is tomorrow. I want you to present the Medical AI project to speak about what you did to save it." Callie felt her breath catch in her throat. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck there. The Global Technology Conference was the biggest stage Helix Dynamics ever took, where thousands of experts, investors, and partners would gather. She, who had once been only a janitor, was now expected to stand before the world and speak about the code that had brought her back into the light. She stammered, her eyes shimmering with fear. "I'm afraid all they'll see is the wife of a traitor." Her words were like a blade, not only cutting into Callie's heart, but touching something in Damien as well. He stood stepping out from behind the desk, his gaze fixed on her. "I see you," he said, his voice low, carrying a rare sincerity. "The woman who saved this company, the woman who turned soulless numbers into hope. They will see that if you let them." Callie lowered her head, her hands trembling. His words were like a warm wind, but the past still weighed heavily on her shoulders. Her heart waged a silent battle. But finally, she drew all her courage. "I'll try," she said, her voice small but steady. "But I can't promise I'll be any good." Damien smiled faintly, the first real smile she had ever seen on his face. "You don't have to promise," he said. "Just be yourself." He nodded, gesturing for her to leave, but his eyes stayed on her, as if he were seeing someone he'd never truly understood before. Callie's small apartment was bathed in the warm yellow light of the old desk lamp. She sat on the sofa, her arms wrapped around her knees, her gaze sad but glimmering with a fragile hope. She had just come home from Helix Dynamics, her mind still reeling from Damien's request. Speaking before thousands, the thought made her heart pound, a mix of terror and exhilaration. Soft footsteps echoed across the floor. Nico emerged from the bedroom, his wide eyes shining in the lamplight. "Mom, why aren't you asleep?" he asked, his small voice full of concern. He climbed onto the sofa, curling against her side, the warmth of his small body melting some of her fear. She smiled, brushing her fingers gently through Nico's tousled hair. "Tomorrow I'm going to talk in front of thousands of people," she said softly, as if telling him a bedtime story. "I'm going to tell them about numbers and how I helped the company build something that can save lives." Nico looked up, his eyes bright as stars. "You can do it, Mom," he said firmly, as though there was nothing in the world his mother couldn't do. His innocent words were a balm on her heart. She hugged him close. "Thank you, my little superhero," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. She was no longer the shadow of the past, but a mother, an engineer, a woman stepping into the light. She looked out the window where the city lights flickered in the distance. Tomorrow she would stand before thousands, not just to speak about technology, but to prove she had emerged from Ethan's darkness and her own. The city center auditorium glittered under the chandeliers, every seat filled with thousands of investors, technology experts, and partners from around the world. Light from the giant screen spilled across the stage where Callie Rivera stood, her breath a little uneven, her shoulders trembling slightly under the bright stage lights. She wore a simple, neat gray dress, the one Nico had picked from her closet that morning, smiling wide. "Mom, when you wear this, you look like a superhero." Her eyes swept over the crowd, feeling their curious, doubtful, even judgmental stares, as if they were searching for a trace of Ethan in her. The Global Technology Conference was the biggest stage Helix Dynamics had ever taken the place, where the future of the medical AI project would be decided. Callie, who had once pushed a cleaning cart through this building's hallways, was standing here now not to beg forgiveness for the past, but to claim her own worth. She thought of her little boy's innocent encouragement. "You can do it, Mom," and Damien's faith in her, and she searched her heart for courage. She drew a deep breath. Her voice rose, at first hesitant, but gradually growing strong. "I used to be someone who cleaned floors," she said, her words echoing across the auditorium and making thousands fall silent. "I once believed I had no place in this world of technology, but knowledge doesn't disappear just because you lose your position." She paused, letting her gaze meet theirs, refusing to look away from the skeptical eyes. The Helix Dynamics Medical AI project was on the brink of failure. We found a way to save it by listening to the data as if it were telling us a story and helping it find the right path. She turned to the big screen, enlarging a chart with its smooth green curve. We added normalization and nonlinear model checks, reducing error by 60% in a single night. This isn't just a number, it's hope. It's a chance to save lives. Callie's voice wasn't dry like most technical presentations. It was full of feeling, like a story about a journey from darkness into light. The auditorium was utterly silent, then suddenly erupted into applause. Investors in expensive suits, experts who had worn skeptical looks, were now standing, clapping without pause. Callie stood on the stage, her shoulders no longer shaking, her eyes shining with a hint of pride. She hadn't just spoken about technology, she had spoken about herself, about the struggle to rise above prejudice and reclaim her voice. Behind the curtain, Damien stood still, his hands in his pockets, his deep blue gaze fixed on Callie. He was no longer the cold CEO he'd been at the beginning, but a man witnessing transformation, not only of the project, but of Callie herself. In his eyes was pride and something more complicated, as if he were remembering Ethan, who had once stood on this stage with the same burning passion. He thought of Ethan's late apology, the regretful words folded in the pocket of his suit, and felt that some part of the past was finally healing. When Callie stepped off the stage, the applause still crashed like waves behind her. As she passed Damien, her eyes met his, and in that moment, they needed no words. "You did it," Damien said, his voice low, wearing a rare smile. They didn't just see engineer Callie Rivera, they saw someone changing the future. Callie nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, but not from pain, from a deep, relieving sense of peace. "Thank you for believing in me," she told Damien, "for giving me this chance." She had stepped out from Ethan's shadow, from the weight of her past, and become a new voice her own. Back in her small apartment, Nico sat on the sofa, his big round eyes bright. "Mom, will you tell me about the conference?" he chirped, snuggling close. "Did you make 1,000 people clap?" Callie smiled, gently brushing Nico's messy hair. "I did, my little superhero," she said softly, like telling a bedtime fairy tale. "I told them about numbers, and they clapped because I did something I was afraid I couldn't do." Nico looked up, his smile as bright as sunlight. "I knew you were a superhero," he said, wrapping his little arms tight around her. Callie hugged him back, feeling her heart overflow with warmth. She was no longer the quiet woman pushing a cleaning cart. She was an engineer, a mother, a new voice. The morning after the conference, the first light of day slipped through the curtains of Callie Rivera's small apartment, casting golden streaks across the worn wooden floor. Callie sat at the kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in her hands, her eyes fixed on her phone screen. An email from Helix Dynamics had just arrived, its short title making her heart pound. Invitation to assume the role of lead innovation advisor. She read it over and over, as if she couldn't believe her own eyes. From a janitor to an accidental engineer, she was now being invited to officially lead innovation on the medical AI project, a position Ethan himself, even in his brightest days, had never dared to dream of. She set the phone down, her gaze glimmering with a mixture of surprise and pride. But Ethan's past still pressed on her like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. She stood and gently smoothed Nico's messy hair as he sat at the table, drawing a robot. "Mom got offered an important job at the company," she said softly. Nico looked up, his big eyes shining. "Does that mean you'll be an even bigger superhero?" he asked, grinning wide. Callie laughed, hugging him close. "Maybe so, my little superhero." That evening, the small apartment was filled with the smell of pasta, the dinner Nico had insisted on, to celebrate Mom being a superhero. Callie wore a pale blue sweater, simple but warm, her brown hair down around her shoulders, so different from the tense woman on the stage yesterday. She was setting the table when the doorbell rang. Nico ran to open the door, and to Callie's surprise, Damien Cole stepped inside, holding a bottle of apple cider. He wasn't wearing his usual black suit, but a gray shirt and jeans, looking more approachable than she'd ever seen him. "Mr. Cole?" Callie blurted, her eyes wide with surprise. "What are you doing here?" Damien smiled faintly, setting the bottle on the kitchen counter. I wanted to congratulate you in person, he said, his voice low, carrying a warmth she hadn't expected. And I thought Nico might like some cider. He glanced at the boy watching curiously from the table. Nico's eyes sparkled as he blurted out, "Are you my mom's boyfriend?" The innocent question made Callie freeze, her cheeks flushing pink. Damien let out a soft, genuine laugh, a rare sound. "I'm just a friend," he said, his gaze flicking to Callie, carrying something hard to define, not resentment, not distance, but a connection slowly forming. The three of them sat down to dinner, and the little apartment grew warm in a way Callie hadn't felt in years. Nico talked excitedly about the robots he wanted to build, while Callie and Damien shared gentle stories about work. When Nico tugged Damien down to the floor to play Lego, Callie sat back, watching them, her eyes softer than ever. Among the scattered Lego bricks, as Nico launched a super-speed spaceship into the air, Damien and Callie both laughed, a moment of simple relief, as if all the burdens of the past had melted away, even if just for a second. When Damien finally stood to leave, Callie walked him to the door, watching as his silhouette disappeared into the hallway light. She returned to the living room, where Nico had fallen asleep on the sofa, still clutching a Lego piece in his hand. Callie tucked a blanket around him, brushed a hand through his hair, and smiled. "For you," she whispered, "and for me." For her, the email offering her the role of lead innovation advisor, the applause of the auditorium, and Damien's quiet smile tonight were like pieces of an unexpected beginning. She looked out the window where the city lights twinkled in the distance. Tomorrow she would start her new role not only as an engineer, but as a leader, a new voice, and this time, she knew she was strong enough to face whatever came her way. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment we read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. On Monday morning, Callie Rivera walked into Helix Dynamics headquarters, her eyes shimmering with a mix of pride and apprehension. She wore a dark blue blazer and black trousers, professional but understated. Her new role as lead innovation advisor was a milestone she hadn't dared to imagine, but the looks from her colleagues, curious, skeptical, reminded her of Ethan's shadow still clinging to her. The email inviting her to take the position had come after her resounding presentation, yet it still felt like a dream. Today in the executive meeting room, she knew her real test awaited. The room glowed under cold white LED lights, the polished walnut table gleaming. The board members sat around it, their eyes hard. Marcus, the chief engineer, rose as Callie entered, his voice sharp. "Ms. Rivera," he began, his gaze dripping with disdain, "you saved this project, but you carry the Rivera name. Your husband sold the medical AI source code to our competitor because he was jealous of Damien. How do we know you won't repeat the past?" Callie felt her throat tighten as memories flooded back. She knew Ethan had done something unforgivable. "I know he was wrong," she said, her voice steady, "but I am not him." Marcus slammed a report onto the table with a loud thud. "You expect us to believe the wife of Ethan Rivera won't do the same?" he sneered. Callie stood there, unsure what else to say. Then Damien Cole stood up, his deep blue eyes sweeping the room. He reached into the pocket of his suit and took out Ethan's worn letter, lifting it for all to see. His voice was low, halting. "Ethan and I started Helix in a cramped office with 2 old desks and a dream that AI could save lives," he said, his gaze turning distant. "We worked day and night, living on stale bread, arguing over every line of code. Ethan was the one who inspired me." He paused, the pain clear in his eyes. "But jealousy blinded him. He tried to sell our source code, our dream, to the competition, just to prove he was better than me. When I found out, it felt like a knife in my back. The brother I trusted had betrayed everything." Damien's hand clenched around the letter, his voice roughening. "Ethan couldn't face the damage he caused. He paid for it with his life, and that was too high a price." He unfolded the letter, reading Ethan's words aloud so everyone could hear. Then he folded it again, his expression full of regret. "When Callie gave me this letter," he continued, "I didn't feel anger anymore. Only sorrow for a friend who lost everything to his mistakes." Damien looked around at Marcus and the board. "Callie is not Ethan," he said, his voice strong. She cut the project's error rate by 60%. She pulled it back from the edge. She made thousands of people at the conference believe in Helix again. I believe you've all seen what she can do. He paused, his eyes challenging. Who here has never made a mistake? Callie deserves to be lead innovation advisor because of who she is, not because of Ethan. We should give her the chance to build the future. The room fell silent. Marcus sank back into his chair, still skeptical, but silent. The board members murmured to each other. A few nodded. Callie stood tall, her gaze steady, though her heart was hammering at Damien's words. She spoke up. I used to run from the past, she said, her voice clear and sure. But now, I'm ready to face it. I'm here to do what's right for Helix, for my son, and for myself. Damien nodded, meeting her eyes with a look of understanding. Ms. Rivera will lead the project, he announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. We will focus on the future. Callie felt her shoulders lighten, as if the burden of the past was finally lifting. Ethan's memory would always be a scar, but Damien's words were like a light showing her the way forward. 3 months after that tense meeting, Helix Dynamics' medical AI project had exploded into success beyond anyone's expectations. Hospitals around the world began testing the system, and early results showed diagnostic accuracy improving by 40%, far exceeding initial goals. Callie Rivera, in her role as lead innovation advisor, had guided the team through countless long nights, fine-tuning algorithms and building trust with investors. Her office, once just a corner cluttered with sticky notes, now glowed bright under the lights, covered in charts of triumph and letters of praise from the board. But for Callie, every step forward carried a trace of Ethan's memory, the man who had laid the foundation, even if his mistakes still lingered as an unhealed wound. Today, Helix was hosting a celebration at an upscale downtown restaurant, all glittering chandeliers and echoing laughter. Callie wore a simple blue dress, her brown hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She stood among colleagues, raising glasses in a toast. She smiled, but her eyes were still a little hesitant, as if this success was too big for her to claim as her own. Even Marcus, though he still watched her with some skepticism, nodded to her from across the room, a rare sign of acknowledgement. But the person she noticed most was Damien Cole, standing in a corner of the room, his gray shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his deep blue eyes following her with unhidden warmth. Damien walked over, holding 2 glasses of sparkling apple cider. Congratulations, Callie, he said, his voice low and sincere as he handed her a glass. You accomplished what no one thought possible. Callie accepted it, her fingers brushing his, making her pull back slightly. Thank you, Damien, she replied softly. But this was the whole team's work. She looked around, trying to mask her unease. The connection between them had grown over late-night meetings, passionate debates over code, and quiet moments when they both remembered Ethan. But Callie still held back, as if taking another step forward would betray her husband's memory. Damien smiled, his eyes gentle but resolute. You're too humble, he said. You're the heart of this project. He paused as if he was about to say something deeper, then simply raised his glass. To Helix's future. She raised her glass in return, though her heart felt tangled. Damien's trust in her, the warmth in his eyes, made her want to move closer, even as she wanted to step back. Ethan's mistakes with Damien and the company were still a barrier she didn't know how to cross. That weekend, Callie's small apartment was filled with soft morning light. She was making lunch, dressed in a white t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied up. Nico was racing around the room holding a Lego spaceship. Mom, can Mr. Damien come over? He asked, his eyes bright. He's really good at making robots. Callie froze, the knife in her hand paused mid-slice. Nico, Mr. Damien is very busy, she said gently, though her voice caught a little. She didn't want to admit how the thought of Damien visiting made her heart beat faster. But he likes you, Nico blurted out, innocent and sure. He smiles more when he's with you and me. He set down the Lego spaceship and looked at her with rare seriousness. You're not sad anymore, right? Because Dad is gone. Callie knelt down and hugged Nico, her heart tightening. Daddy is still in my heart, she whispered, brushing his hair back. But you and I were going to be okay, aren't we, little superhero? Nico nodded, then darted to the door when the bell rang. Callie was startled to see Damien standing there in a pale blue shirt, holding a box of cookies and a new Lego set. "Nico called me," he said with a shy smile. "He insisted I come over to build spaceships." Callie laughed, her cheeks warm. "Nico," she called, but the boy was already tugging Damien inside, chattering excitedly. "Mr. Damien, let's make the biggest spaceship ever." The three of them sat on the floor, Lego pieces scattered everywhere. Nico directed them both, assigning Callie and Damien pieces to assemble, his laughter filling the apartment. Callie watched Damien, the man who was usually so stern in meetings, now patiently snapping Lego bricks into place under Nico's instructions. When their eyes met, she felt a softness that made her chest ache. She quickly looked away. "Mr. Damien, did you tell my mom stories about my dad?" Nico asked suddenly, holding up a red Lego piece. Callie froze, her breath catching. Damien looked at her, his expression shadowed for an instant, then turned to Nico. "Your dad and I worked together," he said, voice low. "He was brilliant, but I think your mom, she's even more brilliant." He smiled at Nico, then met Callie's gaze. "She's done amazing things, hasn't she?" Nico nodded, beaming. "My mom's a superhero," he declared, throwing himself into her arms. Callie hugged her son tight, her eyes meeting Damien's. For a moment, she felt a deep connection, one she didn't fully understand. Nico, with his simple faith, was pulling their hearts closer together, even if she was still afraid. That evening, after Nico had fallen asleep, Callie and Damien sat on the sofa, each holding a cup of tea. The soft yellow light wrapped the room in warmth. "Thank you for coming," Callie said quietly. "Nico really likes you." Damien smiled, his eyes holding hers. "He's a gift," he said. "And you've done something I never thought possible, not just for the project, but for me." He paused as if searching for the right words. "I used to think Ethan was everything Helix had. Then everything went off track. But you showed me a different future." Callie looked down, her fingers tightening around her cup. "I'm still scared," she whispered. "Scared that Ethan's past will always be here between us." She looked up, her eyes bright. "But I want to believe in the future you're talking about." Damien set his hand over hers, gentle but steady. "Ethan's past isn't you," he said, "and I'm here not for Ethan, but for you and Nico." She looked into his eyes, her heart beating fast, but she didn't pull her hand away. Nico, with his smile and his Lego spaceships, had opened a door she hadn't dared to cross before. She smiled a small but genuine smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm. 1 year after that tense meeting at Helix Dynamics, Callie Rivera had taken the medical AI project to new heights. The diagnostic system she had refined from pioneering ideas became the standard across hospitals nationwide. As Director of Innovation, Callie launched Nico's Hope, a free AI initiative originally created to provide diagnostic tools to public hospitals in underserved regions. The project, inspired by her son Nico's bright smile, was built with the unwavering support of Damien, who stood by her through late-night meetings and challenging days. Callie and Damien had built Nico's Hope together from the first steps. In a small office at Helix, they worked side by side, Callie fine-tuning the algorithms, Damien securing funding and forging connections with hospitals. On those long nights, surrounded by paperwork and glowing screens, they shared not only work, but stories, dreams, and the quiet moments when Ethan's memory drifted between them. By now, Ethan's mistakes were only a fading shadow. One late autumn afternoon, Callie stood in her office at Helix, soft golden sunlight streaming through the windows and illuminating letters of thanks from local hospitals. She wore a white sweater, her brown hair tied up, a cup of coffee in her hand. Nico's Hope had exceeded every expectation. Dozens of public hospitals had adopted the system, helping thousands of patients get early diagnoses free of charge. Today, she and Damien were preparing to announce plans to expand the project globally, bringing free diagnostic AI to underserved communities around the world. It was a decision born of Callie's deepest conviction that technology should save lives, not chase profit. Damien stepped in, wearing a pale blue shirt, his smile warm. "Ready for the conference?" he asked, his deep blue eyes shining. "You're about to change the whole world." Callie smiled, her cheeks flushing, though her gaze turned shy. "I just want to do what's right," she said softly. "For Nico and for the people who need it." Her bond with Damien had grown through all the days they spent together, from animated debates about code to the evenings when he brought cookies for Nico. Still, she kept her distance, afraid that opening her heart would make her vulnerable again, even if Ethan's ghost had long since faded. Damien set a hand on her shoulder, gentle but steady. "You've done more than that," he said, "and I'm proud to stand beside you." He paused, meeting her gaze as though he wanted to say something deeper, but finally just smiled. "Come on, Nico's waiting at home." Callie's small apartment glowed with the soft yellow light of a table lamp. She was wearing a white t-shirt and jeans as she prepared dinner. Nico raced around the living room, clutching his Lego spaceship. "Mom, is Mr. Damien coming over?" he called, his eyes bright. "He promised we'd build the biggest spaceship ever." Before Callie could answer, the doorbell rang. Nico ran to open it, shouting with delight when he saw Damien standing there with a box of cookies and a bouquet of white daisies. "Mr. Damien!" Nico threw his arms around him and tugged him inside. Callie laughed, flustered by the warmth Damien brought with him. After a dinner full of laughter, Nico pulled Damien down to the floor to build Lego. Callie sat nearby, her heart fluttering as she watched Damien patiently connect each brick under Nico's instructions. Her son's innocence had become a bridge, slowly drawing her and Damien closer. "Mr. Damien, can you stay with Mom and me forever?" Nico asked suddenly, holding up a red Lego piece. Callie froze, her breath catching. Damien looked at her, his eyes uncertain for an instant, then turned to Nico. "I'd really like that, little superhero," he said warmly, "but I need your mom to say yes." He smiled, hope shining in his gaze. Nico dashed to his room to grab more Lego, leaving Callie and Damien alone in the quiet. Damien rose and walked over to her, taking a small box from his pocket. "Callie," he began, his deep voice unsteady, "working beside you, I've watched you turn the impossible into reality with Nico's hope, with Nico, and with me. I can't promise something grand, but I can promise this: I'll be here with you and Nico, every day, to build a future together." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring that glinted in the lamplight. "Callie Rivera, will you marry me?" Callie felt her breath stop. She looked into Damien's eyes and saw love, understanding, and a promise stronger than any hurt in the past. She thought of Nico, who had brought Damien into their lives. She thought of Nico's hope, a project she'd built not for Ethan, but for the people who needed it most. Her heart, once so guarded, now opened wide. Her eyes filled with tears and she smiled, her voice trembling. "Yes, Damien," she said, "I'll marry you." Nico came running back just in time to see them embrace. "Is Mr. Damien staying for real?" he yelled, beaming. He threw himself into their arms. Damien knelt down, pulling Nico close. "I'm staying, little superhero," he said, his voice warm. "We'll save the world together with your mom." Callie laughed, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. Nico, in his innocence, had dissolved the last of her hesitation. Months later, at an international conference, Callie stood on stage, the bright lights shining over her. She wore a deep blue dress, the silver ring gleaming on her finger. Before thousands of people, she announced the global expansion of Nico's Hope, bringing free diagnostic AI to struggling communities around the world. "Technology is not just about innovation," she declared, her voice clear and strong. "It's about hope for those who have never had a chance." In the front row, Damien sat beside Nico, pride radiating in his eyes. Nico clapped and shouted, "Mom's a superhero!" Laughter rippled through the hall as Callie smiled, her gaze locking onto Damien and Nico. Working alongside Damien, she had found the strength to turn Nico's hope from a national project into a global beacon of possibility. As the conference ended, she stepped down from the stage, hugging Nico and taking Damien's hand. Together, they walked out under a starry sky. Ethan's mistakes, once a wound, were now simply part of the journey that had led her here. Nico's hope was her legacy with Damien, born of love and the determination to save lives. Callie looked at Damien, then at Nico, and smiled. Ahead of them, like the light at the end of the road, stretched a future bright and full of promise.